este în permanentă schimbare. La Premier Energy privim cu încredere spre viitor, învățăm lucruri noi și evoluăm pentru a aduce bunăstare și confort acasă, la serviciu, în societate. Suntem mereu alături pentru a oferi energie bună și servicii de calitate celor peste 900.000 de consumatori de energie electrică. Ne axăm pe inovație, oferind suport și soluții la distanță. Pentru a proteja mediul înconjurător, circa 85.000 de clienți deja au ales să primească factura prin e-mail. Peste 183.000 de clienți petrec mai mult timp liber cu familia, alegând să achite online facturile, prin internet, la bancomat sau terminale. Și pentru că ne dorim să-ți folosești eficient timpul, îți sugerăm să închei contractul la distanță și îți oferim orice consultanță online. Muncim ca să-ți aducem energia de care ai nevoie pentru a-ți împlini visurile aproape de oameni. Premier Energy este furnizorul tău de încredere.
We are proud to introduce EcoPact, the industry's broadest range of green concrete for high-performing, sustainable and circular construction. Building on the success of EcoPact, which we have already launched in Switzerland, Germany and France, we are now rolling it out across the Americas.
Distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Moldova Business Week 2020. We are at the second day of our event, committed to keep you interested and enthusiastic. And I'm happy to announce that more than 1,200 people from 70 countries of the world are watching us right now, from Argentina and Brazil, gliding towards Canada, United States, moving to Portugal, Croatia, Georgia, and reaching countries at Japan and Philippines. And just like yesterday, I encourage you to keep using the features on our online platform in order to network with all the participants from the guest area. I reminding you that we are streaming online right now, live streaming, and all the sessions are recorded and will be available on the platform by December 1st. Don't miss as well the pitching sessions of today, tailored to provide the panoramic view on 5 economic sectors of Moldova: ICT, BPO, electronics, R&D, and fashion. During these pitching sessions, over 20 Moldovan companies will stand up on this virtual stage to present to you investment ideas and partnership offers. The second day will continue with the same eager work on an idea of development in terms of change, international cooperation, engagement, and growth. In Moldova, the international business community is lucky to be part of professional platforms for the interinstitutional dialogue, such as business associations. And you will have the chance to meet them today and assess how actively they are involved through participative behavior in governmental activities, and also at which extent they are boosting the business environment toward transparency and sustainability. Last year, Moldova achieved to be called by the FDI magazine the hidden gem for investment, and we took it as an honest promise. According to the World Investment Report 2020 by UNCTAD, the FDI inflows to Moldova amounted to almost 600 million USD in 2019, which is 90% more than previous year. However, these are bringing to GDP a quite a modest value of only 4.96%. This actually opens up a huge ground for the absorption of new investment and an opportunity for all the stakeholders to bring awareness to Moldova's untapped potential. This crisis may offer a new window to increase the placement of FDI within local economies, attracting in that way attention to the developing countries which are looking for investment. And in this context, we are honored to have international speakers in the next panel who will address new trends, forecasts, reflections, and opportunities that we can explore together. Saying this, I'll give the floor to the first moderator, to Mr. Andrei Krigan, partner at Gateway and Partners. Andrei, the floor is yours.
Hello, Rodica, and thank you for this opportunity to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or maybe good evening. For some, it might be even good night. I use this formula because this year, Moldova Business Week has almost fully moved to digital grounds, and our audience all around the world is joining us in real time. Obviously, the clock hands are showing different hours in Tokyo, Beijing, Moscow, Chisinau, Bucharest, Brussels, London, or New York, you name it. My name is Andrei Krigan, and I'm greatly honored, privileged, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all at Moldova's main business event, Moldova Business Week 2020. During the last 2 decades, the net inflows of foreign direct investment has showed huge growth worldwide. We are well aware that FDI contributes significantly to the development and modernization of the economies all around the world. Furthermore, FDI can offer new technologies and technical knowledge for the modernization of key, important processing industry branches. From the highlight of the UNCTAD World Investment Report 2020, we find out that global flows of foreign direct investment will be under severe pressure this year as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. These vital resources are expected to fall sharply from 2019 levels of around 1.9 trillion US dollars, dropping well below the through reach during the global financial crisis and undoing the already lackluster growth in international investment over the past decade. Flows to developing countries will hit especially hard as export-oriented and commodity-linked investment are among the most seriously affected. I have to admit that is not a very promising perspective. what are the recent trends in global FDI flows and prospects for the coming years? What is the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on FDI in the short, medium and long term, global and by region? What is the impact of the mega trends on global value chains and FDI? We will find this out from our first keynote speaker, Mr. Massimo Meloni, investment policy expert with the Division on Investment and Enterprise of United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Mr. Meloni, you are very much welcome, and I'm offering you the floor.
As this important audience. The excellencies that are present, distinguished entrepreneurs, ladies and gentlemen, my greeting goes out to you, and I am honored for this opportunity. I am here today to share, as Andrei was saying, to share with you the latest analysis by UNCTAD on foreign direct investment trends and policy perspective. As you may know, UNCTAD is the focal point within the United Nations system on issues related to investment for sustainable development. And today I will discuss some of the most recent assessments, not only of the challenges, but also of the opportunities posed by the COVID-19 crisis for FDI, but also by the broader changes in the international production system that we are experiencing and we have been experiencing for the past few years, and that affect multinational enterprises, policymakers in the investment arena, as well, of course, as investment promotion agencies. As Andrei said, we know that the COVID-19 crisis will cause a dramatic fall in foreign direct investment. In June, when our World Investment Report 2020 was released, global flows were expected to decline by up to 40% for the year 2020, from the 2019 value of $1.5 trillion. This would bring FDI below the $1 trillion mark for the first time since 2005. The latest drop follows several years of negative or stagnant FDI growth, and this is a declining trend which started in the years following the global financial crisis. We also projected FDI to decrease by a further 5 to 10% in 2021, which would represent a 60% decline since the peak value of $2 trillion reached in 2015. And this would bring FDI down to less than $900 billion for the year. A recovery in FDI flows was expected to start only in 2022, and a rebound with FDI recovering to pre-COVID level is possible only in that year at the upper end of the expectation. Of course, the outlook is highly uncertain. As you all know, it will depend on the duration of the global crisis and on the effectiveness of the policy interventions that states have adopted to mitigate the economic impacts of the pandemic. Geopolitical as well as financial risks and continuing trade tensions add to this uncertainty. Now, these estimates were largely confirmed in the most recent data that we collected and published last October in our investment trends monitor. However, overall, the actual data for the first 6 months of 2020 showed that the decline was not 40%, but 49% compared to 2019. As lockdowns around the world forced companies to postpone non-essential investment to preserve cash buffers. The decline was more pronounced in developed economies, where flows fell below the $100 billion mark, a value that we had last seen in 1994. FDI flows in Europe were negative for the first time ever, and the flows to Northern America more than halved. Now, the FDI contraction in developing countries was more moderate and averaged 16%. And this can be explained by the fact that FDI to developing countries usually contain more greenfield investment as well as more project finance, and these two components tend to be more stable. But as you can see, the decline in developing countries was spread across all regions. The transition economies are those that actually suffered the most intense FDI downturn. In the first half of 2020, FDI flows to the region fell by 81% to an estimated $5 billion. In the Russian Federation, the largest economy in the region, flows plummeted from a positive $16 billion in 2019 to a negative $1.2 billion in 2020. If we continue zooming in on transition economies, we can observe that greenfield project announcements, which are an indicator of investors' intention, and had already declined by 9% in 2019, have fallen by a further 56% in the first 6 months of 2020. In natural resource-based projects, prospects are shrinking due to weak demand for commodities and also falling oil prices. And oil, of course, is one of the main exports for several economies in the region. In the Republic of Moldova and other less natural resource dependent economies of Southeast Europe, export-oriented production located in special economic zones and producing for global value chains was also affected. And the situation could prove particularly difficult in the automotive value chain, in which some foreign affiliates have had to scale down or to suspend operations. Several Southeast European economies will also be affected through their heavy exposure to the tourism and hospitality industries. And finally, we know that in all these economies in transition, market-seeking FDI will also be declining. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic is a supply, a demand, as well as a policy shock for FDI. It has short, medium, and long-term effects. For this year and the next, the demand shock will be the biggest factor pushing FDI down. Although typically FDI reacts to changes in GDP growth with a delay, the exceptional combination of the lockdown measures and the demand shock will cause a much faster impact on investment decisions. And in this regard, we have early warning signs from the profit alerts of the largest multinational enterprises, which are responsible for the bulk of FDI. Indeed, the top 5,000 multinational enterprises worldwide account for the largest majority of global FDI, and they have revised expected earnings for the year by 40% on average, with some industries plunging into losses. Lower profits will hurt reinvested earnings, which typically account for about half of foreign direct investment. Services industries directly affected by the lockdown are among the most severely hit, of course, and we think particularly of the travel and leisure sectors. Commodity-related industries also suffer from the combined effect of the pandemic on the plummeting oil price and on demand. And in manufacturing, some industries that are global value chain intensive, such as automotives and textiles, were hard hit by supply chain disruptions. Overall, industries that are projected to lose 30% or more of earnings together account for almost 70% of FDI projects, which gives you a sense of the challenges to the FDI landscape. However, the crisis comes on top of existing challenges to the system of international production. Andrea was mentioning that we've seen 2 decades of continuous growth in FDI. This growth was largely experienced in the decades preceding the global economic crisis of 2009 and was driven by largely 3 factors: policies, with a wave of liberalization and export-led growth policies, economics, labor cost arbitrage opportunities and declining costs of trade, and technology, with advances that allowed for the fine slicing of production processes. These same factors, however, started pushing in the opposite direction after the crisis, with a return of protectionist tendencies, a gradual decline in the rate of return on FDI, and increasing technology-enabled asset lightness in international operations. The next decade, the decade to 2030, is likely to prove one of big transformations for the international production system. There are three key technology trends of the new industrial revolution that will shape international production. As you can see on the screen, these are the robotics-enabled automation, enhanced supply chain digitalization, and additive manufacturing or 3D printing. Each of these technologies will have distinct effects on the length, on the geographical distribution, as well as the governance of global value chains. For example, the robotics-enabled automation reduces the labor cost component in production, increases economies of scale, and can lead to the rebundling and reshoring of fragmented processes. The application of digital technologies results in a reduction of governance and transaction costs in production networks, more effective coordination of complex supply chains, and improved access to them for small and medium enterprises through the platform economy. And finally, additive manufacturing leads to a higher geographic distribution of outsourced activities in the final stages of global value chains, location closer to markets and customers, and concentration of value added in the design phase of the value chains. Now, the pace and the extent of adoption of these technologies will depend to a significant extent on the policy environment for trade and investment, which, as I mentioned, is trending towards more interventionism, rising protectionism, and a shift away from multilateral to regional and bilateral frameworks. New industrial policies tend to push for the clustering of know-how and technology and for the rebundling of trade costs and increase the risk of technological fragmentation. And regionalism will shift trade preferences from global to regional value chains. On top of this, sustainability concerns will also be an important driver in the transformation of international production. We think of differences in the approach between countries and regions on emission targets, on environmental, social, and governance standards, and this will add to trade and investment policy pressures. For instance, through the need for carbon border adjustments. Markets and consumers are finally pushing for changes in products and processes, and supply chain resilience measures will become even more important as a result of the pandemic. Now, the effect of these trends of the technology, policy, and sustainability directions on international production are multifaceted. They are at times mutually reinforcing, they occasionally push in opposite directions, and they will play out differently depending on the geography and on the industry concerned. Depending on the starting point of individual industries, for instance, they will tend to favor one of the four trajectories indicated on the screen. The first is reshoring. Reshoring will lead to shorter, less fragmented value chains and a higher geographical concentration of value added. It will primarily affect higher technology, global value chain intensive industries, such as automotives, machinery and equipment, as well as electronics. The implication of this trajectory include increased divestment and a shrinking pool of efficiency-seeking FDI. For some economies, it will imply the need to reindustrialize, while for others to cope with premature deindustrialization. Diversification, which is the second trajectory, is the main alternative to reshoring, and it implies that some companies may find the diversifying internationally more effective and they will give up some economies of scale by involving more locations and suppliers in the value chain. Diversification will lead to a wider distribution of economic activities and will primarily affect services such as financial and business services. It will, of course, present opportunities also for global value chain intensive manufacturing industries such as textiles and apparel. The trajectory, of course, will create opportunities for new entrants, both regions and firms to participate in global value chains. But since it relies more heavily on supply chain digitalization, it will cause those value chains to be more loosely governed, platform-based, and asset-light. Regionalization, it will imply a shift from global efficiency-seeking investment to regional market-seeking investment, and from investment in vertical global value chain segments to broader industrial bases and clusters. This trajectory will also affect regional processing industries, such as food and beverages, some global value chain intensive industries, and even the primary sector, including energy as well as agriculture. Finally, replication implies a shift from investment in large-scale industrial activity to distributed manufacturing, which relies on lean, physical, and quality digital infrastructure. It will lead to shorter value chains, a rebundling of production stages, more geographically distributed activities, but more concentrated value added. This will be especially relevant for hub and spoke and regional processing industries such as pharmaceuticals or medical equipment. Now, the four trajectories all have implications, of course, for policymakers. The push for reshoring will cause a shock to those economies that depend on export-led growth and global value chain participation. Diversification and digitalization will imply a challenge to value capture in global value chains, but it will also create new opportunities to participate in them, though it will increasingly require, as I said, high-quality hard and soft digital infrastructure. Regionalization will make cooperation with neighbors on industrial development, trade and investment of critical importance. And replication will change the model of investment promotion focused solely on large-scale industrial activity. Now, what can policymakers do to confront these challenges and capture the opportunities? We call for a change in the investment development paradigm. From a focus on export-oriented efficiency-seeking investment in narrowly specialized value chain segments to an export plus focus, plus investment in the production for regional markets, plus investment in a broader industrial base. From cost-based competition for single-location investors to competition for diversified investments based on flexibility and resilience, and from prioritizing large-scale industrial investors with big infrastructure to making room for smaller-scale manufacturing facilities and services with lean infrastructure. A new investment framework fit for the decade of transformation should therefore incorporate four elements. The first is to embark on a new investment development path, which implies shifting strategic policy direction from one driven by global value chains and segment-targeted export orientation towards one based on regional value chain export expansion with domestic industrial clustering to build linkages and resilience. In following this new path, countries should balance open industrial development policies with built-in national economic security and resilience mechanisms. Second, building a new enterprise ecosystem by promoting a business environment attractive to new investment activities and conducive to technology dissemination and sustainable development. An important component of the new ecosystem should be the modernization of infrastructure for digital, physical, and institutional connectivity at the regional and sub-regional levels. Third, building dynamic productive capacity for expanding the manufacturing base. This means strengthening industrial clustering and retooling special economic zones and science parks, which are viable approaches that match with the regionalization and diversification strategies of the multinational enterprises, and can also help countries to foster a more resilient and inclusive economy by crowding in the domestic private sector, the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, and facilitating the backward linkages with the larger companies. And finally, formulating a new investment promotion strategy, i.e. adapting investment promotion and facilitation to the new investment development path. This includes resetting priorities for investment promotion, targeting diverse investment activities and business functions, and facilitating green and digital investors, as well as impact investors, to promote investment in the sustainable development goals. In this area, UNCTAD has developed a set of policy tools to assist governments and investment promotion agencies close the large resource gap to achieve the sustainable development goals through a big push for private sector investment. As Stefan, the next speaker from UNIDO, will develop more on investment and the sustainable development goals, I will stop here, but I of course remain available to answer any questions you may have, both during this session and later. And for this purpose, you have my contact information on the screen. And with this, I thank you. I hope I have stayed within the assigned time, and the floor is back to you, Andrei. Thank you very much.
Dear Massimo, thank you so much for these insights and for your presentation. You did just great in timing. I would like to ask you still 2 questions, if we can do, very shortly. In the current context, how can Moldova prepare and secure the flow of necessary FDI into its economy, since these resources are so valuable?
Yes, this is a very, of course, important question. And the economy of Moldova has a broad range of assets to build upon, as we have heard throughout these 2 days. It already has a very favorable geographic position between the East and the West. It has a very high quality investment climate, which has also proved particularly stable and resilient despite the recent challenges. And there is a very strong commitment to reform on the part of the government. Despite these assets, of course, as we've seen, the world will face a number of challenges before FDI flows start resuming. So what I would say is how to best cope with the current crisis and prepare for the time when FDI flows will resume. And in this regard, I would say that Moldova should and could focus on boosting the aftercare services provided to investors, both domestic and foreign investors, in order to not only retain them despite the challenging environment, but also to promote reinvestment from existing investors that are already familiar with the climate. And in this regard, a quick response window could be considered to receive, to interface with investors. Second, Moldova has already quite an extensive regime of free zones. It could use these times to remodel and retool the free zones towards multi-facility zones that are based on the excellence of the infrastructure and facilitation, business facilitation that is offered to the participants in the zones. This can also assist building linkages, supplier linkages between the zone citizens and the broader economy. Third, the investment promotion efforts could be focused on targeting those investors and projects that can assist the country achieve its digitalization and sustainability objectives, which, as we have heard from His Excellency the Prime Minister, are driving the country's reform agenda. And finally, use this time in order to continue improving the overall investment climate, with a particular focus on the investment-specific legislation, so as to establish Moldova as a center of excellence not only in the region, but in the world for the facilitation and attraction of investment.
Massimo, thank you so much for these valuable insights, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
All the best to you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you have heard the combination of words impact investment. Impact investment. These are investments made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. Impact investment can be made in both emerging and developed markets and target a range of returns from below market to market rate, depending on investors' strategic goals. The growing impact investment market provides capital to address the world's most pressing challenges in sectors such as sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, conservation, microfinance, and affordable and accessible basic services, including housing, healthcare, and education. How can we connect sustainable development goals with quality FDI following the global pandemic? How can we leverage small and medium enterprises' opportunities to core performance metrics compounded with a digitalization strategy? Our next key speaker knows everything about it. Please welcome Mr. Stefan Krach, Industrial Development Officer with the Investment and Technology Promotion Division of the Department of Digitalization, Technology and Innovation of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Dear Stefan, welcome, and I'm giving you the floor.
Thank you very much, Andre. I hope everyone can hear me well. I'm sending you my warm greetings from sunny Vienna, and I want to thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity to be part of this very prestigious event, in particular the government of Moldova, Invest in Moldova, as well as all the sponsors and dignitaries which made this excellent event happen. So I will focus my presentation, as you already said, Andre, on impact investing, and we feel this is an important point to make with all the stories about supply chain disruptions, drop in FDI, etc., to actually present an opportunity, maybe a silver lining on the horizon of international investment promotion, which could be the impact investing segment. Of course, that said, it's not a panacea to sort all the challenges in relation to the current world's biggest crisis, but it could mitigate some of the most severe effects. So I'm going to take you very, very briefly through the impact investment, explaining what it is. And in doing so, the best way to do so is to look at the different spectrum, or to look at the spectrum of different investment types, where you have basically two poles. So one pole is the traditional investment type, which maximizes financial returns and which basically pays no or very little consideration on environmental and social and governance criteria. So it's all about maximizing financial return. Then on the other end, there is philanthropy. So these are charity organizations, organizations that collect donations, and their main raison d'etre is to do good and achieve social and environmental goals. So what is interesting is what is happening in between these two poles. And you can see that there is an increase of foreign direct investment, which is coined responsible investment or socially responsible and green investments. And it's within this framework that an interesting market evolved over the last 10 years, which is the impact investing market. So if I can give the internationally recognized definition of these impact investments, and namely this means they are investments that are investments made into companies, organizations and funds with the intention to generate social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. So often these investments are also referred to as investments that tend to maximize the triple bottom line as opposed to just the financial bottom line. So of course the financial bottom line remains important. So these investors are still looking for reasonable IRR values. They look for good net present values and generally good financial performance of the project. That's a prerequisite. But then equally important are those social and environmental considerations. So, for example, on the social consideration, you would look at projects that make a tangible contribution to for gender empowerment and women empowerment in businesses, that involve the youth in the project, that do significant amounts of trainings to all layers in the company, so that everyone feels is having a social benefit from the project that is ongoing. And then, needless to say, also the environmental impact is becoming more and more important, and this is often mentioned as being also an opportunity in the sense of a building back better narrative, that some of the mistakes that have been made in being too resource intensive on the environment can now also maybe be corrected in rebuilding back better and rebuilding back greener, so to say. And here again, impact investment can play a very important role to look at greenhouse gas emission reduction, or sequestering these greenhouse gases to reuse them for other purposes, and so on. Just very briefly on the characteristics of this new market. So it's important that the main source for this is provided by the Global Impact Investment Network. So this is an NGO which is based in the US, in New York. And they have about 100 very prominent members as impact investors, including banks like UBS, like Deutsche Bank, as well as others. The Rockefeller Foundation was one of those that actually were the founding fathers of this movement. And we're talking about currently a market which is about 4.4 billion USD. And this is based on a survey made to close to 300 impact investors. And as you said, Andrew, in your introduction, there is a certain preference to invest in some projects as opposed to others. So where impact investors are extremely active is the renewable energy sectors, where currently assets under management account for about 30 billion USD. Then this is followed by financial services, which have an inclusive element of bringing in, for example, rural farmers, to bring in marginalized group, help them access financial services, also services of e-banking and so on. We have another sector which is forestry and timber, rather on reforestation and having this industry in implementing circularity principles. Then of course deforestation. And we're looking then at another range of industries, from food to agriculture, microfinance, affordable and low-cost housing, healthcare, and so on. What is interesting is we heard from our colleague Massimo from UNCTAD that the FDI landscape is under extreme distress and may actually drop by almost 50% at the worldwide level in the next year. And it has grown. If you look at FDI stocks in billion of US dollars, until now it has grown constantly, with current FDI stocks accounting to about 35 trillion USD. But the growth was relatively moderate, of just 37% over the last 5 years. And it's, according to the forecast, of course, this curve may flatten even further. Now, if this is compared to the growth of the impact investing sector, you see that the sector has grown to almost 600% over the last 5 years, reaching the 400 billion assets under management. And some forecasts actually foresee this to reach even an amount of 2 trillion in the next 5 to 10 years. That is still, let's say, not replacing foreign direct investment, but its share in FDI is becoming increasingly larger over time. Now, if we look at different regions, and this is once again based on the survey undertaken by GIIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, the growth rates by regions have been significant. So compound annual growth was 25% in Western, Northern, and Southern Europe, followed by Eastern and Southeast Asia, as well as other regions of the world. The region that interests Moldova the most, which is the Eastern European and Central Asia region, which is combined here in this chart, has still received a compound annual growth rate of 11%. So the market right now is about 10 billion USD. Unfortunately, I was not able to obtain reliable figures about the current size of the market for Moldova, which leads me to believe that there is maybe an untapped potential that one can try to address by dedicated investment promotion techniques and events like this one of today. Now, who are these impact investors? So in many cases, these are funds, these are sustainable banks, which look at doing debt financing, but they also look a lot at as private equity. We also have development financial institutions, we have pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and so on in this area being very active. So most of these investors are located in the US or the UK or Netherlands, Luxembourg as well. But they're also emerging in economies like China as well as India. So if, for example, we take one which is Capricorn, which is listed here on food and agriculture. So this is currently a fund which manages about 5 billion USD. And they initially started in financing digital startups in the IT sector. But they have broadened their portfolio to look at different areas of the SDGs, renewable energy, low-cost housing, etc. Now, another impact investor segment is in education. And I took this example, which also connects a bit to the points made by Massimo from UNCTAD, alluding to the fourth industrial revolution, which if a country like Moldova wants to attract this digital FDI, of course, the issue of skills formation in new professions becomes extremely important. So to this end, it also becomes important to finance and help startups, help students become more aligned to the requirement of the local private sector in the country. So if you take, for example, University Ventures, which is also investing in private equity, a lot in the US, by the way. So they provide seed capital to startup enterprises. They provide capital for so-called initiatives of last mile training, which means students who leave the university and who have problems to find a job, they can be given a condensed training with a very practical approach to what the private sector is requiring at the moment. And that can help to increase, of course, employability of young students who want to take advantage of dynamics in the economy. And lastly, we have a large number of investors in green projects, and these are, for example, the Triodos Investment Bank, which is a Dutch-based bank that has about 3.3 billion available capital with investments in 50 plus countries, and they invest in various things like environmental protection projects, biodiversity projects, renewable energies, and so on. As I mentioned earlier at the very beginning of this presentation, the impact investment segment can be an interesting segment in cushioning perhaps the most severe impact of the COVID-19 crisis. And that is because it would seem that those impact investors, in a survey that was undertaken earlier this year, they are relatively resilient right now to the current shocks. So only 20% of the investors said they will decrease their investments. And in fact, 16% are saying we would right now even increase our future engagement, because we see from everything that is happening also an opportunity for new entrepreneurs, for new startups to unlock new creative solutions that deserve being financed. So there is an additional 1.8 billion of capital which was made available, which may not seem huge if compared to the global level, but it's a start, I would say. And this will very much focus on obviously healthcare solutions, which mitigate the immediate health crisis, but it will also provide solutions on industrial safety and making sure industrial businesses can maintain their operations during the lockdown, but can also have a good restart of operations once they go back to full capacity, hopefully in what they have had prior to the crisis. And also finally, what is interesting in this coalition that is willing to respond to the crisis is that many of them are very willing to accept below market rate returns, meaning they won't look to have the general market rate returns like regular private equity, but they look at, they accept IRRs that are below. And some even look at mere capital preservation in those investments. So my last slide here is a bit trying to then connect it to what this might mean for SMEs in Moldova. I understand many of these SMEs may participate in today's event. What I think is important is to first give visibility to SMEs at the global level, and to try to link these SMEs to these investors through formats like these, but also through further formats that may follow. I believe there is a lot of creative potential, a lot of ideas supported by conducive policies, supporting by the university systems, by institutions like ODIM and so on, which have support to SME development. So it is important to help these SMEs to get ready to have a good engagement with these investors, to also arrive at having fair contracts which benefit all parties. So not only the investor, but also the SME, which is implementing the project. And it is also important that to usher in a bit of a mindset shift, perhaps, among some of these SMEs, that if they really want to attract this type of investment, they have to broaden and enhance the impact measurement and management as part of their existing performance metrics, because it would mean to measure really very concrete things like CO2 reduction, to measure concrete things of labor force inclusion, technical trainings given to different groups in the company, and so on. And that will become as important as financial performance from the perspective of an impact investor. So what makes this a bit complicated, there's a lot of metrics out there, the SDGs, which with its 169 sub-targets, so we have the 17 goals, but we also have the sub-targets. We have a large catalog of metrics, for more than 400 of them. We have, of course, ISO standards, 14,000 on environment and others. So it will be important to guide a bit the Moldovan SMEs through this maze of different performance metrics, ESG metrics, to help them choose the right one, which resonates well with such an investor. Finally, I'm happy to refer you to some of our own work as UNIDO. We have an online training academy where we invite you to learn more about impact investment. It's on purpose, it's made quite practical for SMEs to understand what this is all about and how they can benefit. So for now, I will stop with this presentation, and thank you very much.
Dear Stefan, thank you very much for these useful insights on the impact investment. I would like to ask you two short questions. Do you see relevance for the Republic of Moldova's growing entrepreneurial scene in diversifying their financial options into impact investing?
I think there will probably be a lot of segments that can benefit from impact investment. Let me mention one, and this is in relation to how harnessing digitalization can actually provide better resource management, can make a better social environmental contribution. When preparing for this session, I got quite excited to learn, for example, about the Tech Wheel project, which is a project spearheaded by the Technical University of Moldova, which is a 4,000 square meter hub for entrepreneurs to do co-working, to have tech labs on 3D printing, on Internet of Things, and so on. And this is exactly the creative environment that is required to help startups develop sound projects and help startup then to go to the market and try to see how these projects can be financed. Also, for instance, events like the FinTech event that took place in Moldova last year are very promising, because FinTech is likewise a sector where impact investors would like to invest. So all these are very good initiatives, and I think they need to be promoted more. And I'm sure that the likes of Invest in Moldova, but also the entire network of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the diplomatic services in the various countries is doing its level best to bring Moldova much higher on the international agenda. And obviously, if we can help in this, as UNIDO, we are very glad to do so.
Dear Stefan, thank you. Moldova is famous for its agricultural products. Beyond wine, that is well known worldwide, Moldovan wine, are there any new opportunities to be harnessed for impact investor attraction in this area?
Thank you, Andre, for the question. Moldova, what I learned was once considered the orchard of the Soviet Union for being a country with extremely fertile black soil, a lot of production on fruits and vegetables and other crops and so on. But of course, if this soil and cultivating these crops, there is an extensive use of pesticides and monoculture production. Of course, that may also eventually lead in the declining yields and so on. So I would think, for example, that organic agriculture can be a very interesting niche for impact investors. I learned that about only 4% of Moldova's arable land now are utilized for organic agriculture, which is not too much. But on the other hand, many agro-processors and agricultural companies are moving into this segment quite fast. So while in 2015 there were just 40 companies present in this sector, now there are about close to 150 companies in organic agriculture. So, and apart from the environmental dimension, there's of course a market opportunity, because you see consumer patterns changing in some of Moldova's main export markets in the European Union and other countries, where consumers are more and more conscious about the way food is produced, and also the way this food chain, or the value chain of the food value chain, can be traced, even to the extent that some consumers want to know from which farm the wine came, or from which farm the fruits and vegetables came. So, if presented well to a potential investor, also, looking at meeting private labels like the Forest Stewardship Council, like the Fair Trade label, and so on, that would help a lot in making a convincing argument to an impact investor, which would want to see that less water is being used, or water is used more responsibly, or less pesticides are used. Maybe there are strips of wood and land which are kept uncultivated to make sure biodiversity can happen, and habitat of animals and insects is not destroyed, and these kind of things. So big opportunity, and of course SMEs in these sectors will need some support in harnessing these opportunities.
Dear Stefan, thank you for sharing with us your thoughts. Thank you for joining us today. All the best to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I remember myself 14 years back from now, starting my first job in advisory business. On one of the days, in our company office, several experts met to discuss how can regulations in various business sectors be liberalized and improved to boost these sectors' growth. These sectors were IT, wine, and textile specifically at that time. Those experts were working for the first seed project that was financed by United States Agency for International Development. Several years after, oh joy, I joined those experts, working specifically on several researches that backed up the creation of, for example, Wine of Moldova sector brand. And just recently I had the great honor and privilege to be one of the experts working on the strategic program for Moldova's Tourist Development 2025. All that would not have been possible without the support of US aid, and we are very grateful to the American people for that. That being said, with great pleasure, I would like to welcome our next keynote speaker, Mr. Scott Hochlander, the USAID Moldova Mission Director, who will share with you and us USAID's strategic vision about Moldova as a hidden gem for investment. Mr. Hochlander, good day. The floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Andre. Thank you to Mrs. Rodika Rabenyuk, and the warm welcome. And I would also like to say welcome to the many participants, hopefully investors around the world. What a great venue. It's great to be here. USAID is pleased to partner with Moldovan Investment Agency in support of Moldova Business Week. I know that you've already heard from Ambassador Hogan, from many dynamic speakers across business, across other sectors. You have an amazing lineup, and from the development partners and businesses USAID supports. I love the theme, Moldova as a hidden gem for investment. This theme echoes USAID's strategic vision. We strive to partner with the private sector to drive change, to make Moldova a competitive country, its products, people, and culture known worldwide, and with a vibrant economic environment where Moldovan businesses can flourish. Moldova is a country with enormous potential. USAID's experience has been that even relatively small investments can be catalytic. We've seen this to be the case across our development portfolio. Engaging with the private sector and facilitating investment is a key component of USAID's approach under our new strategy. USAID's vision is to elevate our work with the private sector as a needed advocate and problem-solving partner. Growing businesses associations, and public-private partnerships are an essential part of Moldova's journey to self-reliance. I'd like to highlight some successes. Today in Moldova, we are seeing the benefits from democratic, economic, and social progress made over the last 15 years of pursuing a path towards European integration that takes advantage of the country's geographic and cultural connections. Since 2005, Moldova's IT exports have risen 48-fold to 198 million, creating well-paid jobs for nearly 30,000 people, mostly youth, with an average monthly salaries almost 4 times the country average. I'd really like to thank Stefan, our previous speaker, for the shout out for TechWell and for the FinTech event. These were supported by USAID and the government of Sweden. The value of Moldovan agriculture exports to the EU over the last 10 years have increased by 171%, thanks in large part to increased quality of products. I know you mentioned plums, because those are certainly one of them. Moldova's light industry exports have achieved nearly 35% growth since 2006. This week is about opportunity and investment. So what are we thinking now and what are we doing? Not surprisingly, our thinking is influenced by recent events. There have been so many Moldovan businesses hit hard by the pandemic. USAID has redirected assistance to meet many of the challenges of COVID-19. First off, our commitment to agribusinesses and to our transformative sectors remains the same. But we realize Moldova will need to work harder than ever to demonstrate value in the market and attract investment. In conjunction with the Ministry of Economy, USAID is supporting an e-commerce initiative. We think a digital economy is the future in Moldova. It presents a transformative opportunity for Moldova's traditional brick and mortar sectors. We see it as the best way to digitally match incredible Moldovan businesses and products with markets in Europe and around the world. We also see it as a driver of rural economic activity by crowding in small and micro businesses into the economy. Finally, we believe there is the public and private sector buy-in necessary to reform policies that will unlock e-commerce's potential. USAID Moldova, through a business investor matchmaking activity called Invest, is working to protect and promote legacy investments in key economic sectors like the ones already mentioned, agribusinesses, tourism, ICT, and light industry. To date, Invest has identified more than 200 million in potential investments with Moldovan companies, and nearly 60 potential investors have been profiled, including private equity and venture capital firms, development finance institutions, non-bank financial institutions, and impact investors. The goal in the coming year is to facilitate these linkages and close deals that bring resources to Moldovan businesses. You will hear much more about this from Thomas Flaive after I speak. Finally, I just want to mention that USAID Moldova is also working with the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation to identify lending solutions in support of enterprises impacted by the COVID-19. Just to close, I'd like to say that USAID believes our consistent and measured support of transformative sectors in Moldova has resulted in an environment ripe for investment. We look to you, potential investors, and the private sector to be our partners now and in the months and years to come to achieve our mutual goal of a thriving Moldovan economy.
Thank you, Mr. Hochlander. Short question for you. Just interested, what is your most favorite Moldovan hidden gem from all the economic sectors that USAID supported in the recent years?
Okay, Andre, that's a great question, and I actually get that question a lot in Moldova. Moldovans are, I think, justifiably really proud of their culture, and you see the culture and the heritage come through in so many of these growing sectors. I think because I'm the Ministry Director for USAID, I clearly have favorites. Sector-wise, the ones I mentioned, IT, wine, tourism, light industry, and high-value agriculture are definitely my favorites. In terms of hidden gems, I think I probably have two or three that I'd like to mention, and mainly it's because I don't want them to be hidden anymore. The first gem I would say is invest in youth. There are so many great stories out there of multi-generational Moldova businesses with sons and daughters now leading their enterprises. Some who went abroad and returned with new ideas, but many who stayed. The passion, commitment, and drive of these young business people is so inspiring. So I would just recommend to everyone, learn their stories, be inspired, you'll want to invest. The second one I would say would really be a nod to the theme of the week. And then I would say, look at businesses that are uniquely Moldovan. Wine, tourism, amazing Moldovan fruits, those are obvious ones. But I would say that IT is quickly becoming part of Moldova's heritage. Look at the robotics team from a year ago, gold medal on the world stage. Simply amazing. And I guess I'd just say one more, my third gem would have to be the creative industries, because I haven't really mentioned them up to date. But I think Dwayne and Esther, our chief of party from the Moldovan Competitiveness Project, talked about the incredible dynamic sector in the previous session.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Hochlander, thank you so much for sharing with us the USAID vision. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you. So we go to our next two speakers, and from the USAID team, who will tell us about the new project, USAID Invest, and how it plans to mobilize investment for Moldova's gems. A view from the field, I would say. I would like to give this opportunity to present Mrs. Sashi Yayatilikim, Development Finance Team Lead from the USAID Private Sector Engagement Team, that has a video message for us. And then we will connect with Thomas Fleive, partner at Cross Boundary Group, to present more details.
Hi everyone, my name is Sashi Jayatilika and I am a part of the private sector engagement team in Washington, D.C. I lead our development finance work stream. Thank you all for having me today and allowing me to participate. I wish I could be there in person, but hopefully one day after this pandemic, I'll be able to visit Moldova. I thought I would provide everyone a little bit of an overview of USAID and how we work on private sector engagement and finance. And then I'll allow my fellow panelists to share a little bit more specifically of one of our transactions and investment opportunities that we're seeking to support in Moldova. Overall, in terms of our work with the private sector, we really see development as being good for business and business being good for development. We see and know that without private sector resources and capabilities, we really cannot address the scale and complexity of development challenges effectively. And to be sustainable, we know we need your private sector support as well as engagement throughout the process of design. We know that public finance alone will not be sufficient in order to achieve the goals we would like to seek in global development. As we've been continuing to work in private sector engagement, we realize is that the scale that you bring is much greater if we work in partnership, and especially as we look at sectors such as infrastructure, public services, and even how we look at economic growth. We do not believe that private sector engagement replaces USAID's work with governments and civil society, but in fact, we hope to work together alongside governments and civil society to accelerate self-reliance. We hope to build on your technology progress and expand on possibilities to create higher skilled workforces and improve our ability to link into international value chains and services and programming. We support countries on their journey to self-reliance by looking at a unique contribution of all stakeholders, including our host country governments, our local communities, and civil society, academia, the private sector, as well as our donor partners. USAID prioritizes collaborative solutions that can unlock private investment. We are well positioned to convene, influence, and mobilize others as a catalyst for innovation and enterprise-driven outcomes. Many of USAID's partners are pioneering new ways of working with us through private sector engagement, such as launching impact investment vehicles, venture funds, business franchising models, as well as targeting value chain interventions that take advantage of unique corporate capabilities and more. One such partner that's doing this work with us is called Invest. They are a mechanism that has over 300 private and public sector private actors that work globally to help us map the landscape, identify opportunities, and help us analyze opportunities for investment. Today, we'll be talking a little bit more with my colleague on essentially how Invest has facilitated investment transactions in the private sector in Moldova by identifying and linking companies with investors and financiers. Tom will talk more on how we have partnered with the private sector in Moldova in order to look at opportunities together for investment, as well as eventually building the competitiveness of your local market. We have facilitated more than $200 million in potential investments identified, or we've identified $200 million in investments and nearly 60 potential investors through private equity and venture capital firms. And well, we're looking to partner with the DFC, as our mission director mentioned, on how to better leverage the US government's capabilities in order to support your market needs. And finally, with COVID, our program is re-examining these opportunities for investment and looking at how we can further reduce their risk or perceived risk of investment from outside Moldova, using our donor dollars strategically and cautiously. With that, let me turn it over to Tom to share a little bit more about how we are specifically working in Moldova. Thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you, Sashi, for your message. And we go to Thomas Flaive from Cross Boundary Group. Tom, you have the floor. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Thank you. Let me just pull up my presentation and share that. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. My name is Tom Flaive, and I'm a partner at Cross Boundary. And I'll be speaking to the Invest Moldova Investment Platform. that we've just launched. This platform is, as Sashi mentioned, a USAID funded platform that seeks to unlock $20 million in private capital in the Moldovan market in the coming 2 years. And the method of accomplishing that will be at the firm and investor level. So that's to say, working with specific companies and specific investors to see transactions come to fruition. There are a number of organizations already involved in this platform. As I mentioned, USAID Invest is a program which Sashi referenced that is implemented by a firm called DAI. And then for the specific program, my firm, Cross Boundary, and Civitas, which it may be known to a number of you attending today, which is an active advisor throughout the region, are partnered to help facilitate these transactions. Cross Boundaries developed the model being deployed for the Moldova investment platform for the past 5 or 6 years, and it's been implemented in many emerging and frontier economies across the globe. Between ourselves and Civitas, we've worked on over $1 billion worth of transactions. And I would say, using the model that we're deploying here, we've closed over $500 million of transactions. And those transactions are typically in the size of $1 to $10 million. So it's a large number of deals that have been closed in the past 5 years. Over the past few months, and even into last year, we executed a number of assessments on the Moldovan investment landscape as we prepared to set up this platform and begin concretely working with companies to help them raise capital. Before we jump into the model and start looking forward, we did just want to share some of the themes that we saw in the market as we did this research. And most of this research comes from some desktop research, but the vast majority was by interacting with over 100 Moldovan firms, interacting with a wide number of investors, both in the market, but also in the region and globally. And finally, interacting with a number of service providers. The first piece of context that I would add is that local investors are not supplying enough capital to meet market demand. I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone in the room. The previous speakers have already spoken about the dip in FDI that Moldova has relatively experienced in the past 10 years. So I won't go into that more extensively, but I do think this chart on the right-hand side is very telling. And what it shows is that Moldovan firms, much more than their neighbors or their peers throughout the globe, are often relying on internal financing more than external. So rather than get a loan, or rather than go work with a venture capital firm or a private equity fund, these firms are taking money out of their own savings, or they're retaining earnings, and that's how they're fueling their growth. And it's okay. It's very conservative, but it does mean you're going to slow growth, because the fast-growing business should be able to find and attract outside capital that it can reinvest in a profitable way for all involved and scale more rapidly. The second piece of context I'll give you is that enterprises are finding the capital raising scenarios either too time intensive or too costly or simply mystifying. And when they do find potential partners, often those partners are not value add enough. So on this left-hand side, you can see, I think unsurprisingly, that 63% of the firms we interacted with, and once again, this was about 100 firms who ranged in size in the sector in Moldova. We found 63% had never taken outside capital, and that's not unheard of. What I found a bit more striking was of the minority that had, the vast majority was local commercial debt. Once again, we expect to see the most coming from commercial debt, but you can see how nascent the equity markets here in Moldova are, even relative to some other smaller emerging markets. It is an area of an untapped resource. I'd move to some of the just anecdotes on the right-hand side, because I think you can start picking up a theme, and it's to say either firms have never considered taking in equity investment, or they have and they've gone down that road and after 12 months and a lot of cost and time invested in both sides, it's fallen apart. And that's a challenge that's not unique to Moldova, but it is one that we've seen before. And that is one of the problems that the Moldova investment platform that we've set up with USAID and are launching now is there to solve. The final piece of context is, despite interest in Moldova, investors struggle to meet their investment criteria. Yeah, I find this a pessimistic title, but I actually see this as a very optimistic slide. So the problem is, you're hearing investors, this venture capitalists on the left saying, we're interested in Moldova, but we haven't yet found the right deal. And that's very common. And we can see that the challenges investors often have in the market are that firms are too small, they have inadequate revenues. That's the biggest reason that investment doesn't happen. The second is that firms are too informal and are not ready to take in private investment. Once again, these are themes and complaints we hear in many of the markets we interact in. It's once again areas that the platform is there to come in, and we're there to be the local team that can help an international investor who's maybe not going to come and travel to the market to do a $1 million deal, but will look at that deal if we show up in their office in London and show them the pitch deck and make the case. That's how a platform like this can help smaller transactions occur. On the informal nature, the platform can also work with companies to get them investor ready. And there is a difference between being business ready, just being a good, viable business, and being an investor ready. And in that latter case, you need to have cleaned up your financials. You need to have a very clear and thought out growth plan and a use of capital. And that's something that we always will do working with companies before they go out and seek. The reason I say this is an optimistic slide is at 91%. Of the investors that we targeted for Moldova, and this was typically investors who we thought may be interested in Moldova, whether they operate in the region, they were European, US, but had a purview to Moldova, 91% expressed interest in investing in Moldova, given the right opportunity. So that's really the key. It's finding the right opportunity for these investors and bringing it to them. That 91% says they will look at those deals if we can find them. Just the last piece of context I would offer is that we did refresh this assessment post-COVID and really just finished that a week or two ago. And I don't want to, in a way, sugarcoat it. I think we all know the real challenges that COVID has caused, and many of the enterprises that we had talked to last year that we checked back with had experienced real challenges, had to do a number of layoffs, had been afflicted by this. On the positive side is the vast majority of those companies are still in operation, and they are optimistic about the year to come, and they are actively seeking to raise capital to similar numbers to what we were seeing prior. And the other side of this that's not quoted on this slide, but is just as true, is the investors we're talking to are still keen to deploy. Some of them are because they're impact investors, and COVID is an opportunity for impact. The second side of it will be just that investors still need to deploy capital, and COVID is an opportunity for them to find good opportunities. So let me move to the platform that we'll be deploying. And this is what we call our approach to bridging the gap. One other term that you're hearing today is blended finance. This is a graphic of blended finance. The concept here is, with USAID, we've set up the donor-supported investment facilitation. That will be a team who's there to work with investors on one side and companies on the other side to structure mutually beneficial transactions. And where they can become blended, that can mean pulling on these various boxes on the bottom left: downside protection, credit guarantees, typically concessional tools that lower the risk for an investor and make them willing to do a deal they potentially would not have done. I won't get into all the detail here, but the services that this platform will offer will range widely based on whether you're working with a company to raise capital, or you're working with an investor to execute and close a transaction, or you're working with both sides at once. You can also come in the early days of the investment and just help with opportunity validation and market intelligence, or you can come in much closer to the end and really be at that final table as you help underscore neutral valuations and help both sides of the parties or both parties structure the transaction in a mutually fair way. So I won't get into the weeds of this slide, but as you can see, it's a wide range of services that typically have to do with what an investment bank or a management consultancy would offer. It's financial modeling, it's valuation, it's deal structuring, due diligence, and market intelligence. Now, as I wind down, just two slides. One is a case study for a very different transaction. This was a transaction that we advised that was a $1 million VC deal into a tech company in Iraq that closed in July of 2020, so just several months ago. Iraq and Moldova are wildly different economies. The reason I use it is for a piece of optimism in that this transaction was being supported well before COVID in Iraq, which is always a challenging market to close a transaction. COVID came, the deal slowed down, it sputtered, but the company pivoted. It improved its business model to deal with COVID. The same investors who were potentially interested maintained their commitment. We were able to attract one other venture capitalist to enter the deal. And that transaction ended up closing on schedule just several months ago. And it's a highly impactful deal. So this company specifically is a tech-enabled delivery startup, which is not a terrible business model to have in the time of COVID. And you can see their implied employment is expected to jump 3x thanks to this investment. So it's a smaller deal, it's an innovative deal, and we like to mention it because it's just so recent and it's showing that deals in some of the most challenging markets are still getting done. So this is my last slide. It's a bit of a call to reach out to us. We have just launched this platform with Invest and with USAID. We are seeking companies who are looking to raise capital in the coming year and a half. The priority sectors are listed on the right. These are guidance. If a company is raising capital in Moldova and thinks our support will be helpful to them, reach out and we can figure out if the sector is a fit or not. But this is in no way a rule. So lastly, I'll leave our contact information here and I'll stop. Thank you, everyone.
Tom, thank you so much for sharing the details of Invest project. Unfortunately, we don't have much time available, so we'll have to finalize here. I just hope so much that the first transaction will not last long, and I have a feeling that it's going to come from ICT or agribusiness. Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing today and joining us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was our panel on FDI. Please stay tuned for the next sessions. Thank you.